Hello, system thinkers. Welcome to the recap of episode 077. I am super excited to welcome back to the question, Lauren. Lauren, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciated this question. It's one that is near and dear to my heart about culture, as you know. So thanks for bringing it to the community.
I'm so happy to be here, Ben.
So we are right off the heels of Config, where I got to see you on stage talking about design systems anarchy and giving an amazing storytelling experience about punk and venues. And will you give us just like what was like the sort of the 1 minute recap of your talk, if you could do that? I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah, totally. I think after 10 years in design systems space, I found myself in a place where I was stuck in a feeling of control, like I needed to control everything around me. And over time, I realized that that's not what I wanted to be doing. It wasn't helping the situation. It wasn't making the system adoption or my influence any better. And so I've kind of flipped that to think more about what relinquishing control and enabling experimentation really feels like from a design systems perspective.
It's interesting because I think that's the movement that I feel from the systems community at large, right? So I think you're tapping into something, or everybody's sort of tapping into something that's happening to us as a community of practitioners. It's funny because that aligns so beautifully with the mood of this episode, which is like this new thing I've been trying to do for the last, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 episodes, is just after reading through all the stories people tell, they take so much time to answer these questions and tell us like very vulnerable stories from their experience. I'm trying to sort of look through those things and pick out like, what are we feeling as a community? And so the mood I chose was hard-won equanimity, a profound state of mental balance and stability that remains undisturbed by life's emotional upheavals, the ability to accept events as they occur without clinging or aversion, empowering you to observe reality clearly while maintaining a warm, compassionate, and engaged heart. And what you just described is sort of like that sentiment, like letting go. Does that sit with you?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's like really the only way to survive the industry right now. There's so much thrash and so many new things happening, and it's ultimately like hard to figure out which direction to look in.
Yeah.
And so I actually have masking tape on the top of my monitor that is a Leonard Cohen quote that I heard another design leader say that really helps me in this moment. And it's, if you don't become the ocean, you'll be seasick every day. And it's like a constant reminder to myself that I need to be relinquishing that control and just like embrace what it is to be present in this moment, in this industry.
Gosh, yeah, it's so good. It reminds me of a quote from Bruce Lee, I think, which was like, be the water, And I think we, as an industry, we talked about that quote a lot at the moment when responsive web design came on the scene. And I think we were talking about it. I remember many presentations. I think Josh Clark gave one that referred to this, but it was about this idea that like the content that we're trying to deliver, to the masses, essentially through the stuff we're building, is going to be delivered through so many different vessels, different screen sizes, different bandwidths, different, you name it, every scenario. I'm on the bus, I'm at home, big screens, little screens, all of that stuff. And the content has to sort of flow, right? It has to be able to adjust. And I loved that sentiment at the time, but this is different. This is about you and me. This is about us actually like letting go. And so it's a deeper, maybe like a deeper yearning here that we're hitting on.
Yeah. And like, it's funny because I feel like this episode does in many ways tie back to the first episode I did with you, which was about managing your systems brain and your systems mindset. And the systems brain has a tendency to see ahead of other people, to make assumptions about maybe the pattern recognition that they're seeing happen. And in that, there can be like a sense of control naturally because you're like, I know how this is going to end. And I feel like this moment is really testing that part of my brain And so I need to use tools like this to really
Yeah.
ground me again in the present.
That's so good. So we didn't really talk about this in the session, but you're not just a practitioner, you're also a leader. So as a leader, what are you doing to help your team understand these concepts?
Yeah, that is really interesting and challenging to think through as a leader because I'm also in it with them. And so I really encourage a growth mindset and like learning as much content as you can. I'm actively sharing every article I read every morning and encouraging discussion with my team. And really, I lead a cross functional team. We're trying to blur those lines and really be open to what the shape of careers will look like in the future. So, like, if a designer is spiking into building more, finding engineers to pair them with to really let them blur those lines in this new era.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's a conversation I want to continue to have with the community. Is just like a lot of systems folks, I think, find themselves in sort of the player coach role without really ever asking for that or intentionally, sort of, approaching that. And so there's a lot of folks who don't have experience, in that sort of leadership seat that are being asked to lead. So I think maybe
Yeah.
there's stuff there to sort through.
Yeah, actually, that reminds me of a conversation that we had at the end of the episode
Mm.
today, which was around, naturally we got into AI tooling,
Yeah.
people's frustration with kind of leadership pushing for people to use it and the system not quite being ready to use it and the outcomes either if when the system works or the system doesn't work. And I think like when you're asking me about leadership, I've taken a very explicit approach at my new role, which is I'm responsible for both of those things, both design systems and
Mm.
tooling to enable anyone to build. And so I'm hoping that that positioning can help bring the system along in our evolution and our journey, because I sense that when the system is not brought along and people are encouraged to experiment, that drift between system usage and what gets shipped just starts to increase.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. All right. So much to unpack here. Let me, I realize we kind of jumped right in. That's just kind of how we roll, but let me make sure folks who are tuning in also understand the topic. So the title for this episode was Design System, Culture versus Compliance. Lauren and I have both been folks who have been vocal about the lack of material around culture and how that is so critical to the success of a design system program. So I was super excited when you brought this topic. We asked folks 4 questions. The first 3 were just pick one from a list of options. The first question was how much do you believe that culture change approaches like community, relationships, and shared values outperform compliance approaches like mandates, gates, and enforcement for long-term design system health? And we gave 5 options for folks to choose from. The second was, what's the primary mechanism that your team uses to drive design system adoption? And they had to choose one from 6 options. So that first question is about like, what do you believe it should be? The second is like, what's the reality? What's the primary mechanism in your current scenario? And then the third question was, who's held accountable for design system adoption within your org? And we gave folks a handful of choices there too. And then we asked one final question that was open text. We just said, describe a moment when you chose to relinquish control and tell us what happened. We sent this out to 1,105 design system practitioners. We got 61 responses. And as always, wherever you're watching or listening, you can get a link to the raw data to do your own analysis. So, where do we go from here, Lauren? Let's get into it.
Well, I thought what was really interesting mentioned in the group, and maybe it would shift the way that people responded and the outcomes that we saw in the data, was that I think there was this assumption maybe made by me and you when we were crafting these that like, is culture bottoms up and is compliance top down?
Mm.
And I think that culture is actually both. Like, you need to have those cultural shifts happen at many levels in order to be successful. And then you can also have those mechanisms for adoption at both levels too. So, like,
Yeah.
we might build linters and skills, and leadership might put adoption mandates in place.
Yeah.
And leadership might express values about using the system in large meetings and things, but also the way we embed with teams bottoms up can help shape that.
Yeah, it's so true. Culture is like this tricky thing. It's hard to define, and in one sense, it's like the aggregate of the beliefs of all the people, which is like this huge, just messy ball of values, right? And so it's like there's like strength that emerges when the overlap of the things that people believe is bigger. And so when we have leadership believing the same things that practitioners believe, their actions are the ones that are perceived as top-down actions, right? They're going to say, yes, hey, we believe in these things, so please do it. And when the practitioners believe in these things, they're going to start contributing. They're going to start adopting. They're going to jump into the work with you, And so, yeah, those are two symptoms of a good, healthy culture and shared values. So yes, I think you're right. It's not just about top-down, bottom-up culture, mandates, much more nuanced than that. And you said something actually, as we were looking at one of the diagrams, which was that you feel like there are sort of seasons for these kinds of things. And so can you walk us through this, like, or I can, or whatever, this like layers of governance diagram?
Yeah, maybe you can walk through it and then I can weigh in on it.
Yeah, let's do that. So
Cool.
after reading through the stories, especially the question 4 stories, I was just thinking, I think it sort of like shifted my mindset a little bit, because if you like read the things that I've written to date, I have sort of been against the idea of enforcement more traditionally in my kind of history of systems writing and thinking. But I think these stories helped me to sort of see that it is a necessary ingredient in the work, and that actually it doesn't have to be a bad thing, right? And so I sketched out this diagram, which was like, hey, if we just think of these as layers, not as like either ors, on the bottom layer, we have this idea of embedding. So as system practitioners, we got to bake really smart defaults into the components. And we're making choices about the level of control we want versus the level of trust we give to consumers in the way that we construct those things. A great example from the answers was this idea of, hey, if I build a composable component versus a configurable one, composition means I'm trusting these teams to sort of put things together well. Configuration means I'm going to like significantly limit what you can do with a thing and give you 2 or 3 choices, right? So those are different perspectives. Neither is necessarily right or wrong, but they create a different sense of trust. So that's embedding, right? Then enabling is like the work we do to teach, to train. This is the support we give, the trust, all those kinds of things that we're doing daily, right? Embedding with teams, right? Just helping them accomplish their tasks and learning from them too, right? And then the enforcement layer is like, hey, we've done all this work and we've said we trust you, but also we need some authority. We need some teeth here. We need to be able to say, you know what, the thing you built by composing X, Y, and Z actually doesn't meet the quality bar. And so we need catches, and we need that sort of trust but verify mentality too. So that was sort of the layered thinking. Now tell me what this resonates with or doesn't for you, Lauren.
Yeah, it absolutely resonates. And I see it almost as cyclical or as part of the system evolution at times. When I've worked on kind of 0 to 1 systems and getting everyone from the Wild West of a bunch of hard-coded values and DIY everything to aligning everyone to a system, it's been a little bit more on the enforcement side because, we had to kind of get everything to a certain standard.
Yeah.
But then from there, and doing so and defining a 0 to 1 system, you are auditing the existing product. So you feel like you're making the right choices based on the knowledge that you have of your product at that time. And then that moment when you do hit that like adoption number, and I think this is a way to quickly get to adoption, you then start to say, okay, but it can't stay in one place. It has to continuously evolve. you start to bring in the enablement and embedding more. So, and I think when you have that strict enforcement, it's almost expected that you have a strong opinion on the system.
Yeah.
And then through the future work that you do to continue to grow and evolve and expand the system, you need to maintain that opinion, but create more flexibility. You're never going to know what the product team needs to solve for as well as they are, but you need to provide them with those smart defaults and that flexibility and composability to be able to do that and still be on system.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. What about more the enforcement side then? So like for you, like how are you now handling scenarios where perhaps maybe a consuming team makes a thing using the system that's not great, like what's that scenario like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it used to be a lot harder because you had to have visibility into it, which wasn't always easy. You had to kind of be in the room or know where the Figma file was or anything like that.
Right.
Um, and that just is a lot of human energy. And so I think that what we're able to do with AI is like add more skills up front. So as people are developing, they're making those smart default decisions with tools and agents. And that adds that enforcement layer without having like the human behind it. I think that in the past, we used to notice that like, oh, I made this accessibility plugin. You have to run it when you're ready for handoff or whatever
Yeah.
that moment was. And trying to enforce that behavior just like never stuck. It never became natural for people. But now when accessibility is baked into people contributing PRs to a large project,
Mm-hmm.
that enforcement just gets automated in many ways, away from feeling like humans are trying to like go after their peers.
Yeah. I remember an episode, I can't remember where it was, but we talked about this idea that like it's easier to when like some automation somewhere in the process finds an issue with your work than if like Lauren found a bug for me. So like it's easier you can be upset with the AI, but don't be mad at your peer work, at your peers.
Yeah, totally. And it kind of goes back to the way things work in even the value of why we do documentation on a systems level. Because I think when it's documented, it almost becomes more objective. It's less of a subjective opinion.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, we've all aligned that this is the standard now. And so they recognize because it's been published or in any way that they're going against like an objective opinion or an objective stance of the system.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you have to think like, and I remember from your talk at Config that I think we talked briefly about this in the deep dive, but there was this sort of overarching sentiment of like, hey, we're going to make cool stuff for you to use, but you got to go out there and build amazing things with it. And also there's like a baseline of expectation, right? So like that first venue, when you walked in, there was like these very high level values, really is what those were on the wall, and so like there's a difference between sort of like the baseline stuff and then the flexibility to go beyond. And how do you distinguish between those? Is that like design principles or something, or like how are you drawing that distinction?
Yeah, I mean, in the past, I've used principles to help define that and really showcase those principles across the org that we support.
Yeah.
But I haven't defined principles at this current role. And my mindset has ultimately changed since the last system I worked on.
Yeah.
And I think about it in the same metaphor that I kind of use in my talk at Config, which is the system is the venue and the product teams are the band. Like, you're not going to as a venue, you're not controlling what they play. As a system, you're not controlling what they build. And recognizing that designers are a lot like musicians and that they can be very wild and messy in their process. It is the creative process.
Yeah.
And so thinking through things like, I think us as a design systems community talked a lot about detaching components. And my mindset in that is that is part of the design process. You can't tell designers not to detach. You can build better components that are less likely to be detached because they're more flexible.
Yeah.
Or you can set principles and values with the consuming teams that if they're detaching, they should tell us why. Are
Yeah.
they intentionally deviating because it doesn't fit their needs? Are they simply exploring? Did they not know? This is kind of that enable layer that the component can actually do that.
Yeah.
And so we need to find ways to like capture that signal and not judge the action around detaching.
Yes. Oh, the lack of judgment, I think, is key here, because that's what creates the safety for teams to go and explore, but also to come to you and ask, and we got to have that. So yeah, super good.
Yeah.
Okay.
And like when we don't have that, or when we do have like this sense of judgment in teams, ultimately it gets back to our team eventually. And typically what that looks like is an engineer asking in a public channel how to do something that their designer,
Yeah,
deviated on.
that's right. That's right.
And so then there is this like maybe anti-value where we do have to go back to them and be like, hey, like, why did you do that? And I would like to create a culture more so where designers know that it's okay and talk to us up front so we can help them and it's much smoother for them to build and
Yeah.
us to support them.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so a quick pivot, because I want to make sure we cover what ended up taking up a large portion of the conversation, which was this. I think, all of us have been in these scenarios now. It's been a couple of years where other disciplines inside of the organization are feeling much more empowered because of AI work, because of their access to AI tooling. And so I was talking with somebody even just this morning who was telling me about the existing workflow in this new organization that she's in. And she said, the product managers prototype anything they want with AI. Those get handed off to engineers who go and try to build it. And when they get stuck, they ask designers how to fix it. And so it's this like bizarre workflow where designers, who are supposed to be the folks in the organization who are solving problems with design, right? They're not even a part of the equation until the end, when those sort of engineering problems emerge. And oftentimes those designers then are trying to untangle these weird prototypes that, maybe there's some value in the prototype, a concept, a new idea, but it hasn't really been integrated thoughtfully into the work. So that led us down this path of folks sharing their either excitement about or skepticism of AI in the world that we're in. So I want to hear your sort of takeaway from the conversation that emerged from that.
Yeah, I have heard those stories and I feel a lot of empathy for people that have to deal with that. I
Yeah.
think that there's like two things that I think through that, go back to me just like becoming the ocean, is that maybe this is an anarchist take as well. I think that our titles are starting to dissolve and be less relevant, and it's more about subject matter expertise. And so we should see the world where PMs are able to vibe code and do some design work in a safe sandbox that builds from the system. That doesn't necessarily scare me when the system is set up to support them.
Yeah.
And where designers feel like they still have a seat at the table. So there's like one thing that I think needs to be in place around partnership and collaboration and recognizing those subject matter expertise in your team. And I think the thing with AI right now is that it's a great tool for working autonomously and not a great tool for working collaboratively. And so what we're seeing is a shift from a time when we were all kind of working in these multiplayer tools, whether it's like writing PRDs together or in a Fig Gym together or a Figma file together. And that work is far less visible now because everyone's in their little local host environment. So designers feel out of the loop or, they're not consulted, and that can result in a very like a negative outcome in terms of culture.
Yeah.
My other take is like design systems need to be in partnership with the people, encouraging that people experiment, because if the system is not directly connected to the tools that people are prototyping or vibe coding with, then that gap between what's available in the system and what gets shipped or even what gets approved becomes wider.
Yeah.
And so in my current role, I'm really taking a stance of being accountable for both of those things on the design team. So the design system and the visual language, but also tools that enable anyone to build. My primary audience right now is like building prototypes for designers, but eventually I want to be able to support a PM who has some design thinking and is in a low stakes area where they're not forging new paths, but solving a problem that's already been solved somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that to me, it feels like the scope of work that the system team owns, or actually maybe it's not even that, because what is your title?
Head of Design Foundations.
Yeah. So Design Foundations encompasses more than just system work, is what you're saying. It encompasses being the sort of engineered context for agentic workflows throughout the organization.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that means just, more scope to do this work well, more responsibility, and it's interesting because that, like, holding both the systems work in the traditional sense that we think of a design system and the sort of AI workflow stuff, those are things that are working at such different paces, such different speeds. That's a challenge, to try and sort of hold both of those in your purview. Are you finding that one has to slow down or one has to speed up? How's that going?
I'm actively trying to hold both of those different speeds and accepting that that's kind of how things go. I ultimately have different people on the team thinking about one speed versus the other, not having to rapidly oscillate between the two, although mentally we are in some capacity because we're all in those tools. But I think ultimately I'm starting from a pretty decent system that's kind of almost ready for this type of environment and workflow. And so it's not like I'm 0 to 1 on a system and trying to solve prototyping at the same time. So I'm kind of grateful to have kind of somewhere in the mix.
Yeah. Awesome. Anything else that stood out to you from the conversation that you want to make sure we talk about?
I just think reflecting on all of this, I love a design systems community conversation because so many people mention at some point or another that they feel relieved that other people are feeling the same way as them, and a reminder that like we're all struggling and we're all in this together.
It's so true. That's, I think, maybe more than any of the content that we stumble upon as a community, just knowing you're not alone in this stuff is like, it's hugely valuable. So, and I think coming off of Config, where so many of us were there in person and got to actually hang out and have a meal or a coffee, there's like, I'm just reminded of just how important this kind of stuff is. So Lauren, thank you for bringing such an important conversation to the question. This will continue to be a place where we tackle these really hard conversations and try to help each other, spur each other along in this. I'm grateful for you, and thank you for being so generous with your knowledge and your experience.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Ben.
All right, folks, we'll see you on the next episode. Cheers. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Question. Remember, you can get access to the raw data, the collaborative Fig Jam, and all of the recordings for this episode and many more on my website, bencallahan.com. If you or your team could use an outside perspective in your design system efforts, I'd be honored to support you in that way. There's more information about my coaching and consulting offerings over on the site. And of course, if you need a hand building a sustainable design system program, my studio, Sparkbox, is standing by ready to partner. Hiring Sparkbox is an investment in your design system and your team. Reach out and let's see if there's a good fit. Thanks for being here, and remember, stay in learning mode.